5:31. Are we all ready to call this meeting to order? So I'm going to call it to order. Excuse me. So guess what? We got to start with the pledge, right?
You need to watch out.
Rob, you want to flag, all right.
My great fear is forgetting the word.
He almost forgot the words.
All right, so first item on the agenda is approval of the November 8th minutes. So right, do I have the date right? Yeah.
I'll move to approve the November 8 minutes.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Corrections, edits? Hearing none. Before we do that, actually, we gotta vote to put Debbie in from Zoom. I forgot that. So let me table this for a second. Yeah, when roll call votes, I get that. So hi, Debbie, sorry. So we have to, somebody move to have Debbie participate by Zoom? Okay,
Second.
all right, and then we don't hand vote this one, or we do hand vote this one? We do, okay, so.
Rob Nato, yes.
Ken, yes.
Krista, yes.
Yes,
Yes.
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 all right, the yeses have it. Debbie, you're with us.
Close vote.
All right. So a little out of order. I apologize. I'm not sure if it follows Roger's rules, but we'll go back to the approval of the meeting minutes. I think we had no discussion, so we're ready for another vote. Hand vote. Want to start with? We'll start with Rob again.
I'll abstain because I was absent at that.
Fair enough.
Yes.
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 And Debbie?
Did we hear us?
Yes,
Okay.
Hold on. I think I need
yes.
to my vote.
Did you hear me?
Oh,
I abstain.
oh,
I was not also
Yes,
not
we can
present
hear
at
you.
that
Alright.
meeting.
fair enough.
You can hear it, Debbie.
All right, so moving on, I put on discussion of the presentation that we got last week, which was very helpful. We talked a lot about it. I just wanted to give there a little space in case anybody had any thoughts or things that they wanted to say about it before we get the town budget going.
I had a question about it because I was absent. In reviewing the November 8th minutes, I noticed that we took a formal vote to request that the school district provide information to Mark so we could have a similar spreadsheet. Is that how we're supposed to make formal requests of department heads and executive boards?
My guess is you might, I don't think that how we make the request was necessarily addressed unless somebody else remembers it differently. But I think whether it's appropriate to make the request was certainly discussed. And I took away from that that's an appropriate request.
Okay,
Maybe others, it wasn't clearly answered in terms of what the golden mean is between sort of micromanaging and trying to do our due diligence to understand what the governing body's budgets are is my takeaway. So good faith has to be involved. But I also took away from it that we're basically doing a good job. So maybe others have different thoughts about it, but that's my shorthand.
okay. Well, then maybe just together we'll decide if we need to make the request formal on paper in the minutes.
Could you pull your microphone?
Oh, of course. Of course, yeah.
Does anybody else have any different opinion about that?
I think my take, well, first of all, thank Catherine and coming. It was very
Neat.
thorough, far more thorough than I expected. So that was helpful. I think it was great that we were all in the same room hearing the same thing. I think my big takeaway from, my question, maybe the historical question, is that if we can frame our questions in the form of what is the financial impact and what are the ramifications of those things when we're talking about them, then that's helpful versus I agree or disagree with that particular policy. So if we start with, for instance, the facilities question that came up the last time. So it's fair to ask that question in terms of, how is this person's role different? And what are the ramifications of that? What I took away is it's not fair to ask, should that position have been expanded? That's a superintendent's decision, not a budget committee decision. So it's like that weird fine line, like you're kind of doing both and dancing in both worlds. That's what I took away.
And I'd sort of agree with that. What I was hearing was that the budget committee is dealing with the financial impact, but the programmatic side is up to the school board or the select board. The budget committee ends up just approving a bottom line dollar.
But I still think it's kind of weird because you kind of have to do a little of both.
Yeah,
right?
it's a gray area, no question.
So, I guess coming into this as a rookie, I will give you as much information as I possibly can without, violating anybody's rights as a member of our hired folks, where normally we would go into. So what part of my concern with answering the question about facilities person was if we got into individual performance, for instance. If that was a school board meeting, we would go into non-public for that because that is, reputation and all the rest of it. So just keeping it within the construct of what the job is, not how the person is doing that job. Those are two different questions, if that's fair.
So one of the things that Rich asks about a lot, which helps me, is full-time equivalents, right? So that's not a direct money question, but it helps us understand expansion and contraction of the school district or the town employee base. So is that, a realm in which we're allowed to delve? I mean, by everyone's reckoning.
Yes.
Yeah,
Sure. I mean, it had to be because full-time personnel is the largest part of the budget. And so it has to be. But I think it's more like, I think to your point, Rob, like what's the area we're exploring with FTEs? If the area is, how are FTEs tracking student populations and how does that relate to the financial impacts? To me, that seems relevant. It's like, we don't think the school policy on class size, which is contributing to the FTEs, is appropriate. That's a school board conversation. That's how I see the distinction. And it will never be totally black and white. I thought it was really good. By the way, I'll just say, just general. I was on the fence for what about it, and I'm really glad that we had them come. I learned a lot, and just even when there was a response to an inquiry that might not have been as black and white as any of us might have liked, that's okay, because that's the realm that we're operating in. There is a lot of gray, and so it was helped to just like socialize some of those actual scenarios and hear what they had to say. And so for me, I felt like it was really, really beneficial.
I agree with that. I also think one of my big takeaways from it is that, at the end of the day, we all serve our constituents. And at the end of the day, I mean, if we ask a question, and it helps the constituents understand the budget, it's probably a good thing. I'm mindful of the idea of micromanaging. I'm mindful of the idea of programmatic and saying we need to eliminate this line and overstepping. So I'm not saying like everything is great. Like no matter what we decided to do, if we said we wanted to eliminate one section of Spanish or something, that probably is not appropriate for the budget committee to look at. But at the same time, I think through our public efforts to understand the budgets, it's probably helpful, is my thought.
It was nice to hear that, she was basically a common raider to me because she sees a lot of towns.
Right.
And the fact that she, gave us a lot of kudos that we were basically doing what in her mind was correct. And the fact that other towns are all over the map. I mean, we've been fortunate we haven't had suits here against the fire department, the police department, and all those other really nasty things that you read in the paper about other towns. It was just kind of comforting, but I think we ought to give a kudo to to our leader over there in the town, because he keeps so much information flowing and pulls all these things together in a format that is really amazing. And the town report is really a history lesson every year. And that's a heck of a lot of work, but it sure leaves a nice track for people to trace what's going on, and if they want to read it, to understand what's going on. But I think far too people actually look at that thick book, but if they did that, they'd certainly understand a lot more of how the town operates. I thought it was really good. She covered a lot of
agree.
ground. She really seemed to know her stuff. And it was good.
Just one other point to follow up. I was just thinking when I was listening to what you were just saying is in the past, we have certainly heard a lot of concerns that somehow different governing bodies are hiding things, not telling us things, that things are not transparent. And what was quite clear to me from that presentation is that we're doing a very good job of communicating what the budgets are and why, compared to other towns and district, compared to other, towns throughout the state. So I wouldn't want to lose that thread either. Not that this should just be a mutual admiration society, but I do think it's an important point.
But the fact that she in her presentations to other towns is using some of our documentation as examples of how to do it right. That was really nice to hear.
It was.
I'm sure, we're far from perfect, but we seem to be trying to do the right track.
One of the things that I took away was that our role, they kind of reaffirmed that our role is a check and balance against the governing bodies. But what I never thought of was that we're also a check and a balance against the town meeting, the school district meeting, the people who are we're a check and balance against them too. And that really made me think for a minute that our role is more important than we realize.
Other thoughts before we turn the floor over to Neil and Ken? Hearing none, let's move on to the town budget, the big show.
I did have one last thought.
Oh.
Is it okay?
Yeah, of course.
Do you mind, Ken, if I share one last thought while you're
Sure.
preparing? One thing that I did also take away is, I think, Rob, you said, some of where we might even still have room to improve is level setting where we're going with some of our questioning. So the example you gave, the facilities director, could be asked a number of different ways, right? And some of it is not necessarily, is the crux of the question appropriate, but maybe how you contextualize your interest in the question. So when I was self-reflective, some of the questions I have sometimes are just, I would call it self-education. It's hard for me to understand a budget line item. Maybe I have questions.
Right.
They're not necessarily meant to nitpick at what a certain department wants to do, but
I do the same, and Neil can say, I agree with that. And when we have budget presentations to the select board, I ask questions just to understand, not because I'm against something, it's just to understand.
Right. And so the facilities director stuck out because I think I was one to ask that question, but I think we could all kind of keep in the back. I mean, I certainly will keep in the back of my mind, if I have a probing question that may stem from a potential disagreement, grounding that and why it's relevant to the budget is just helpful level setting, I guess. Anyway.
Totally.
Thank
Fair
you.
point.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Okay. Well, I guess continuing on the theme of what we were talking about, as our committee was reminded last week, a budget is a plan for spending. The budget being presented tonight is the spending plan for the next year, but it really is a plan that is part of a larger plan, which includes what has happened already and what is planned to happen in future years. This past year, several projects that are part of the bigger plan have successfully moved forward. Euston Barn was raised off its foundation and a new foundation was installed, stabilizing the structure for years to come. The new roof will go on any day now, and Dawn is in charge of that.
Won't happen.
The big paving project this year was Farrington Corner Road, where culverts were replaced and the road was paved. This preserves rebuilding work that was done in the past and provides an excellent wear surface. Improvements were carried out at Riverway Park, adding more parking and moving a better community space in this area, which is being used more and more. Renovations to the town hall are being done by town staff. Especially want to thank Neil for all of his efforts on that and to improve the usability of the building. The and the cabinets over here, Neil comes in on holidays and weekends and does that kind of work, which is not recognized enough. On the police station, a new roof was put on and the back roof of the town hall was replaced. So with that, the select board is presenting the 2024 portion of the big plan with the goals of at least maintaining the current level of service and doing it more efficiently, maintaining our well-qualified staff, and meeting our substantial capital needs in a way that doesn't unduly burden taxpayers in the future. The 2024 budget, I'll call the plan, continues to support the larger plan, supporting the capital needs and supporting items that either provide better service or more efficient service to residents. In this respect, several things are included in the 2024 budget. The first payment of the road bond approved at this past year's town meeting adds just over $275,000 this year. Due to timing with contractors, the bond funds will be used this coming year to do the work on Briar Hill Road, and work scheduled to begin in the spring. There's also an increase of $26,500 or 5% again in the road maintenance, paving and shimming line item to continue to preserve roads that don't have to be rebuilt. Then there are 4 proposed changes to staffing. The first is the 32-hour per week assistant town clerk tax collector position has been eliminated, and a 24-hour per week executive assistant position has been added. This new position will do some of the standard administrative things currently being done by the town administrator, allowing Neil some additional time to focus more on things that only he can do. This position will also help to coordinate the numerous grants that the town is seeking and has received. There are funds in the budget to cover 60 hours per week of additional part-time ambulance hours. These hours will allow for an additional trained person to be at the fire station during the day, Monday through Friday. There have been over 70 missed ambulance calls this year, and this position will allow a second ambulance to respond to second ambulance calls more quickly than having to rely on out-of-town ambulances. And this, by having faster response time, can potentially save lives. And it will also add billable calls that will help to pay for this position. On the transfer station, switching one of the 3 part-time transfer station positions to full-time was done by the select board during budget deliberations. This will mean the transfer station will have 3 part-time and 2 part-time positions. It is hoped that this will help us retain staff, and the board anticipates that over time this will result in cost savings and potentially additional revenues to the station. On the sewer, because the sewer operating budget is self-funding, this does not affect the budget, but the town will no longer share a water sewer person with the Kentucky Village precinct, but we'll have a person on our own. This moves us closer to the meeting the recommendations of New Hampshire DES for staffing at the wastewater facility. Now looking at capital expenditures, which have been hit very hard by inflation the last couple of years, as I'm sure you all know. There are no new projects added, but increased costs have taken their toll. There is little room to shift costs down the road because, as the plan shows, there are upcoming costs in the future. Expenditures in the plan for 2024 really cannot be pushed off, and they include painting the outside of the town hall. Chipping has become severe, and because of the age of the building, it's important to properly remove the chips and repaint to assure that there are no lead paint chips. Future major renovations are not funded in 2024. 2024 is a revaluation of property year as required by the Department of Revenue Administration.
When you go back that last line, I missed it on the last slide.
That 2024 is a revaluation of property year as required by the New Hampshire Department of Revenue.
Looking at the 50-60.
Yeah, what is that?
Oh, that's at this point, what we think is the reval is going to result in is a very significant increase in market value for properties from 5 years ago. But remember, even if the valuation increases, the pie stays the same
Right.
for budget purposes. Continuing on ambulance, as scheduled, the 9-year-old ambulance needs to be replaced, and reminder that Warner and Webster help with this cost. For tanker replacement in 1994 and 95, fire tanker is scheduled to be replaced with one new tanker. It is now very hard to get parts for the old trucks. On the transfer station, one of the 3 trailers at the transfer station is overdue for replacement and is included to be replaced this coming year. We have 3 trailers that are vital to the operation of the transfer station. One was replaced last year, and the third one is scheduled to be replaced in 2026. On George Park, the bathrooms at George Park are scheduled for replacement. This project has been put off several times, and they are, as you know, I assume you know, are in very bad condition, really need replacement. This coming year, a solar array will be installed at the wastewater treatment plant. The cost, which I'm delighted to say, is covered 100% by a grant. And this will save significant electric costs in the future, and it'll be providing clean or green power. On the transfer station lagoon cleanup, it's worth noting that the lagoon cleanup at the transfer station and the sludge removal at the wastewater treatment facility are scheduled to be done in 2025, most likely being paid with a bond. Engineering is happening on both these projects now, which will be done in tandem.
Okay. Sorry maybe you're going to talk about this on the last one. Is there any budget impact this year, or it's just you're just giving us an update of?
There's in 2023 we had put aside 160,000 for engineering costs. In 2024 we're putting aside an additional 90,000, as well as we're encumbering the amount that we did not use in 2023. So between the 2 years amount, that is anticipated to cover all the engineering costs. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, is there any estimate at all as to what the 25? I mean, I realize that's what the engineers are working on, so I know.
3.8. I think
3.8. Okay.
I think the 3.8 didn't include the wastewater sludge though, right? It was only the lagoons.
that is correct. Yes,
That
we
has
know
its
that
own-
was required. But that's also paid through, some paid through sewer.
Mm.
Yeah.
It is not the 200,000 that we thought it was going to be.
Yes. move along. With that background, I'll go to the specific budget that's being presented for 2024 began to be created in August of this year and followed the process that has been used for several years now, namely, the department heads create their budget requests, and I want to thank them for all their hard work to create the budgets and for making very reasonable proposals. They review their requests with the town administrator, and then the department heads present their budget requests to the select board at the beginning of November. And for the transfer station, this included the Webster Select Board. The select board then worked to create what is being proposed to you tonight. The board tried to balance the needs of the town with tax impact to taxpayers. It's worth noting that the select board made over 30 changes to department head requests, and these are all shown in your budget books on pages 17 through 20. The most significant change to the request was changing the status of a transfer station position from part-time to full-time, as I previously mentioned. Then funding for capital reserve funds, where possible, were shifted to other years, but no planned expenditures were changed. So with that, let's run through the proposed numbers. On the revenue side, operating revenue is projected to be just over $4 million, an increase of about $61,000 over this year, or a 1.53% increase. The major changes to projected revenue are ambulance revenue up 57.5, mainly due to covering more calls, as I've explained already with the new position. Transfer station revenues up 90,000, mainly due to increased tipping fees. Checking account interest up 53,000 due to higher interest rates, and I want to specifically thank our finance director Kelly Henley and treasurer Joel Moyer for researching and obtaining a better rate. Blood control payment was up 20,750 to reflect the increase that occurred in 2023. 20,000 has been added to reflect a lease option payment from the solar company working to obtain approval for the solar array at the transfer station. On the flip side, there's a decrease of 162,000 in the room and meals funds received from the state. This amount was higher than we had received until 2021, but less than we received in 2022 and 2023, because in those 2 years, the state had added additional funds. And sewer revenue is down because we are no longer receiving payment for half a staff person from the Kentucky Village, as I noted earlier. Okay, moving to the expenses in the operating budget. The operating budget being proposed is $9,746,744, inclusive of the sewer, and it's 6.2% higher than the 2023 budget. The major drivers of the operating expense are an added $275,000 for the first year of the payment on the 2023 road bond. Fortunately, the payment on the highway garage bond, the last payment on the highway garage bond was made in 2023, eliminating a $53,000 annual expense. There's a 4% merit pool for our deserving employees at a total cost of $122,000. Recognizing in this market, we have to stay competitive. There's an additional $96,000 for health insurance. The estimated increase in the cost is 19%, but due to changes in our staff, the increase in the budget is only 11%, only 11%. A decrease of $26,000 in full-time police wages due to replacing the lieutenant with a patrol officer. And I want to thank the chief for doing that. $54,000 in additional part-time ambulance wages, as previously discussed. A decrease of $15,000 in fire department part-time call wages, reflecting previous year actuals. An increase of $65,000 in DPW wages to reflect that we're currently fully staffed whereas last year we were far from fully staffed, and that was recognized when the budget was developed. And similarly with the full-time increase of 65,000, part-time wages were reduced by 19,000. Road maintenance for shimming and paving is increased by 26,500 or 5%, consistent with prior years. Lower fuel and salt costs are shown by a decrease in the budget of 27,000. Staff changes at the transfer station, as previously discussed, add 43,000. Transfer station disposal is up 15,000, and this will be offset by added revenues due to the increase in tipping fees. Staff changes in town hall, as previously discussed, add $8,000. Lagoon cleanup engineering costs are down 90,000. Remaining funds from this year will be encumbered and added to the 60,000 being requested. Okay, on capital reserve maintenance trust funds, the total amount proposed for these funds is 1,133,000, an increase of 271,000. You'll find the complete 20-year plan on pages 59 through 62 in the back of the budget book. With the exception of the amount proposed for the road and bridge CRF, the increase is really just inflation driven. The major drivers for the 271,000 increase are fire vehicle replacement is up 125,000, and price increases for fire apparatus have increased dramatically over other items. And the amount proposed for the road and bridge CRF, which is to help maintain roads as they are repaired because maintenance is substantially less expensive than rebuilding. And as you remember, last year we were almost $20 million in road rebuilding projects behind, and there's 100,000 in that CRF. So on the fund balance, select board's proposing to use 350,000 from the 2023 unreserved fund balance. You'll see all the details of this on page 3 of your budget book. 350,000 is $10,000 less than was used in 2023, and quite consistent with most of the prior 7 years. And remember, this is an amount that is used to reduce taxes, or reduce the amount needed to be raised by taxes. So putting this all together, you'll find on page 1 of your budget book the estimated tax rate for the proposal is presented. The amount to be raised by taxes is $6,773,000, which is estimated to be $8.49 per thousand tax rate, up 96% or 12.7%. So with that, questions?
Question. I was just wondering if you could, sorry, Mark.
Sorry, while you're asking your question, could you just go back to that last slide? Forgive me. I'm trying to.
Questions?
Yeah. Tax rate and tax slide. Go ahead.
In the revenue section regarding recycling receipts, I noticed we have decreased the budget by $10,000 in terms of what we assume we will make on the sale of recyclables. And I was wondering if that's because of the wider world market or because we're recycling less. It's, I'm on page 7.
Yeah, I see where you are. I think we were just looking at what the actuals are. I'm not sure I can answer if it's what is driving it, but one thought with the new full-time position is we've heard anecdotally that people come and they take metal out of the where it's,
Scrap pile.
and that's revenue that we could use, and that may be one area that we may get more revenue in the future.
Do you have any other additions to that?
I think the market is down, but also
hopefully we can do much better than that, given that with the added staff, and it appears, like the board is going, we'll be able to do more enforcement with the pay by bag, which should increase recycling also. And I think having that extra staff person who's really only adds 8 hours a week, but part-time positions are so hard to fill. We almost never have all the positions full. So this will at least sort of guarantee us the 3 full-time people most of the time. So my hope is this is a conservative number and that we're going to see that go up.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? I'm asking it not as a performance question, but because it relates to revenue, which is really like, so there's having staff there, and then there's having staff who really have a compliance mindset. And, which really, means going out there and monitoring. I have seen people take metal from that metal pile pretty much every time I've gone to the transfer station. It means enforcing the rules, which, requires, I don't know if there's a culture change, but because it does relate to transfer station revenue, I'm curious, I guess, if adding staff alone will achieve this outcome, or if there's also like an expectation management piece coming from the select board around both pay by bag and other forms of compliance at the transfer station that will be happening with it, if you understand what I'm asking.
I mean, we've spent a lot of time talking about the transfer station, and certainly what you say about too many people have gotten away from green bags, let's say, and if we can do more education and maybe whether it's spot compliance, another thing is we've heard anecdotally that people that are are inappropriately coming to the transfer station, say people from Concord are dumping their trash here, so maybe trying to spot check, making sure everybody has a sticker that says Hopkinton or Webster. But this is recognizing changing the part-time to full-time. This is just the first step, and we don't know where it's going to go.
I think the answer is yes. that the expectation is when we have more staff and are able to cover things better, that enforcement and all of that is much more of a priority then.
It was certainly interesting when Neil and I met with the Webster Planning Board and they were looking at the landfill and whatever. They were really, a lot of the questions that came up, and you can either reinforce this or not. They were talking about, they were suggesting we need a lot better, closer management of following up on what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that people may not be using green bags. Obviously, it's funny hearing that from them because they don't use green bags. And it was just interesting that they thought there could be a savings there by better management, better regimen of checking who has a sticker and who doesn't have a sticker.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think we heard at that meeting that there were several of them there who had been checked for their stickers. So I think that's what we heard from them. The chair of their select board said he came in a rental car and they came over to check him and then realized it was him and didn't require a sticker on the rental car. So that was good to learn.
Well, no, I heard that too, but I also heard that they thought there were a lot of other things going on that could be squeezed down it to make it more money.
Yeah.
Just in following up, I also wondered on the expense side, the $15,000 increase for disposal costs for the transfer station. And I wonder if that also is affected by the fact that everyone doesn't use the green bags. Like, does the disposal cost go up because less people are recycling and composting? Or is it just the market?
I think it's a combination. I believe the market rates per ton have gone up. But if somebody recycles instead of just throwing something in the hopper, sure, it saves us money.
And I have to assume that year over year, disposal costs are always going up.
basically, yeah.
and probably will continue to do so.
We have
The tonnage rate.
We have a 5-year contract and it increases each year. Our contract actually is a pretty good contract. We were able to get a pretty good rate. I think we're in year 3. I'll have to check if it's year 3 or 4.
I was
Um,
gonna say 2. But whatever,
We
you
can
know,
check on that. But fortunately, Waste Management needed in-state trash, so we were able to keep it. Our year 5 is still below $100, and there are a lot of facilities paying well over 100 now.
2 questions and both regarding the transfer station. So last year, obviously, there was a discussion about the paper bag. Where did that end up as far as?
well, one thing is, as we mentioned, is the new position and whether, to what extent that position will have some responsibility for trying to enforce that.
I guess let me clarify. I thought we were looking at a new vendor and then perhaps charging differently for the fees on the bags. Wasn't that the purpose of giving the authority to the select board to?
They were, the select board is, and I think at the next meeting, we're going to be, talking more about if we want to increase the
Okay.
rates for the
So
green bags.
as of now, nothing has been done on that, solidified on that.
No changes.
Okay. And then last year, we also talked about the tipping fees. It seemed that like contractors pay had been stable for a while. It sounds like we ended up going up on the tipping fees.
We have to have a public hearing and the approval from the Warner board. But the expectation is that, yes, they are going to go up significantly.
So what are we talking dollar was?
I think it's from 110 to 150 per ton.
From
Commercial,
90, I think it's 90 to 150.
Okay, so a considerable.
Considerable more. Through the years, consistently, the town had always I'm not sure why, had always charged the actual rate we pay to the commercial people coming in. And that does not make any sense, because if you run your business and charge what you're paying to go out, that doesn't make any sense. So this would be substantially more. And 150 was actually the rate recommended by NRRA, that are kind of the experts in that.
Consistent probably with what other transfer stations are doing.
Did you say $1.50?
We're pretty
150.
$150 a ton. We're pretty unique to some extent that we take commercial trash. I would say most towns do not.
If the town is going to be going up on the charge of the green bags, is it anticipated that extra charge would be to pay for this new full-time position? Or is it just for the increase in the cost of disposing of the garbage?
Well, it goes into the whole basket of funds. So I couldn't say that, 10% of the salary would be allocated to that. We didn't look at it that way.
If it could be broken down and explained to us where the new charges are being applied on the new green bags, it would be helpful.
I don't follow you because they're not applied to anything except to, reducing the tax burden.
Well, it's just that I was on the board that oversaw some of the policies at the transfer station. And as we worked with Webster, it was always that, if you brought in a refrigerator for disposal, that refrigerator, they would charge you $30 for, because that was the cost for the transfer station to handle that refrigerator. And now we're charging for garbage. So it would be helpful to know what the expense of that bag is paying for in some broken down form. Are we paying just for the cost of the garbage, or is the bag covering expenses for other parts of the transfer station?
We can answer that question as soon as the board sets the rate.
Thank you. That's all I'm asking.
Now, the rate does not cover the cost of disposing the trash, because it hasn't changed since 2010.
If anybody has interest, and this is sort of related to transfer station, but we did a project when I was at the high school looking at if there was actually a correlation between the green bags and an increase in recycling. And Mr. Clow at the time, who ran the transfer station, would send me his annual numbers. It's not a real strong correlation. Matter of fact, it's kind of up and down, and in some places relatively flat. I think I probably still have that data somewhere, and it probably runs through 2017 or 18. So if anybody's interested in having it, they're more than happy to. I think I've been to a few meetings saying we really should do something different to raise revenue than green bags, because I think it's counterproductive. You know,
I think our transfer station expert would like to comment. Did you, if that's okay,
Public comment.
want to save it to public comment?
I mean, yeah, I mean, we have a public comment, but
I have a different thread. Can I have a-
yeah, why don't we continue to probe the budget and then for public
Okay,
comment.
this is not about the transfer station, so if anybody on the committee has more stuff about the transfer station, I can wait.
and
Okay.
different question, if I may. Are we still, can I ask Ken a question?
Okay, yeah.
I think Mark was about.
So
to-
page 26, I'm
Wait.
just curious, your,
Hey, Rob.
yeah.
It's
Mark's
fine.
about to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, no worries.
That's all right. Go
Sorry,
for
Mark.
it. Keep going, Rob. I can
Um,
wait.
So on page 26 on your retirement costs, small number, but a pretty big jump, 34%. I'm just kind of curious as to what's going on there. Is that a change in reimbursement, or it's the bottom section, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down, TS retirement? No, I'm not at the transfer station.
I'm not, you said page
It's
26?
26 of 38 or page 46 of 62, depending upon which. one.
Oh, 46, okay.
46.
Big numbers in the middle.
There you go. Sorry.
Okay, the,
Rob,
Okay.
26.
the big change in the retirement is from moving from a part-time position that does not have retirement to a full-time that does.
Thank you.
Ken, I was just curious. I'm like, I think I tracked your presentation well, so thank you. I was looking at the capital improvement, and you know, it's a big number, right?
Yes.
Not because if anybody's doing anything wrong, it's just a big number, 31% increase. And I was thinking about it in a multi-year context. So I was looking at page 61. The numbers don't exactly line up with what you shared, but on row 175, the capital projects, this is the total. Right, so it shows $1,031,000 in 2024, which is pretty close to what you presented. I think that's the same number as what you're trying to present, or different?
Just to be clear, pages 59, 60, and 61 are capital reserve funds. And that's a separate spreadsheet from page 62, which is maintenance trusts. They're different purposes. And I think the number Ken presented is the total of both.
Total of both.
Mhm.
Okay, you're right. When you said capital expenditures, it's a combination of, thank you, you know. So I think my nervousness is plus 31.5% this year. And then looking at 2025, what's on the list? At least again on for capital
Mhm.
for capital reserve. Oh, sorry, it's so hard to keep track of the different for capital reserve funds, that number going up in another $700,000, which is another 38%. And so like that, I'm just flagging that, I guess. And I'm sure that the select board has talked about this a lot, but as a budget committee member, I couldn't help but notice. It feels like a lot.
It's absolutely a concern. And how do we, whether in a year we can look at it and say, well, we can push something back another year or two, we'll be certainly looking at that, but yes, it's a major concern. I agree.
The biggest increases from one year to the next is the road and bridge capital reserve, which actually was first budgeted this year at 400,000 and it was reduced to 100,000, and the 400 is still in 2025. My guess is that may not remain 400,000. That's where there's the most flexibility, that probably will not. If the bottom line number is that, there would be a lot of other adjustments.
And this is the first year for that
Yeah,
capital
yes,
reserve, right? It
Yes.
was authorized last year.
correct.
No,
The
it was
CRF was authorized last year, but nothing was put into it.
no, it was authorized back when we did, I believe we did it for the bridge that we did on East Pennacook Road back in 2015, maybe. And there was money put in there then. It hasn't been funded much since that particular project.
Okay.
So it wasn't funded last year, clearly, but it's been in existence for quite a while. There's been discussion around for a number of years as to whether money should be put in a capital reserve in a substantial amount to do things, or whether bonding should take place, and bonding has taken place. So that's why not as much money has been put into that.
I have a quick question. On the maintenance trust fund, it says expended 9,000 on the skate park repairs and signage, but I also thought that there was a project contemplating redoing that. Was that just like necessary, like absolutely necessary repairs?
So the 9,000 was the study that's been done.
The study.
Yep, that by a company. Of course, the costs came in substantially higher than
We wanted. them
we were expecting. But that has been done. There was a survey done of users, and the rec committee probably in January, not for this, no expenditures going into this year, but it will come in and talk to the board about all the options. I think all of us who have worked on this feel that the prices are just way too high. But we'll see where that goes.
Will you let us know, Neil, if that conversations? Sure. I'm just personally interested.
Sure. Yeah, I think the lowest one was about 600,000 to build this, and the concrete one, which is where we kind of started, was about 850,000. And I hate to even throw out those numbers, and none of us are comfortable with that. So we're looking at options, other options.
Like concrete one, do you mean like a more like I forget what they're called.
Sonotube?
It's
Yeah,
not,
like a pump park with like less. like, crack, kind of.
so when they designed it, they tried to design it to be as good as the one we have, which I guess is pretty good. I have to admit, I'm not really my bike is more 10 speed from the 80s. So that's what they were trying to do. And those are some of the things. Can we do certain elements and replace, but everything has to fit together to be safe and to go from one place to the other.
Because I
And
wonder if you could do a backwards approach and say, we don't have 600, we have, like, what could we get if we gave you 300?
that is certainly one of the options.
Yeah.
So they have not done a final plan, but our feeling was there should be discussion with the board prior to going back, and we certainly aren't willing to commit 300,000 either, but yes, no, that's one thing that has been thrown out. So that is one of the options. So that discussion will be ongoing. But it is clear that a lot of the skate light, which goes on the outside, has been replaced, but the frames are old enough that they are deteriorating quickly. So something, whether that's removing them and there's nothing there or doing something else, that really needs to be done within the next couple of years.
I wonder if there's an option to do a public-private financing model as well for that.
That's one of the options we've thought about too.
I will come to the meeting.
The Northeast Delta Dental Skate Park.
Yeah, there you
That's
go.
another sports.
John Lynch State Park, skate park would make sense. Ken, on page 16, halfway down, Public Works full-time wages, there's correct budgeting of wages is a $53,000 difference.
Okay,
What are they meaning? Page 16,
16 or 60?
16, 16.
Okay, what I had mentioned and quickly in my presentation was that we had reduced the budget last year because we had so many we knew we had so many vacancies. And now we're at full staff. So that's, we're recognizing that there's full staff.
So the additional $53,000 is the additional staff?
Yes, additional staff, not additional positions.
Right.
And part-time or overtime has been reduced because of
Yes, I did see that. Okay.
And a portion of that in all the wage lines, all of any increase goes into effect at the pay period closest to April 1st. So you always get, if you look at every wage line, you get that January, February, March portion of the increase that was given in April that wasn't included in last year's budget.
Okay. And then over last budget cycle and this budget cycle, we're at 10.5% on the merit pay increase. My memory serves correct.
we're having a 4% merit pay increase this
And
year.
Last year, we had 6.5%.
No, it wasn't that high.
Yes.
Was? Okay.
So 10.5% over 2 budget cycles.
Yeah.
Do we have a sense, and hopefully this was looked at last year, but how our pay scale compares to the surrounding towns that we would be competing against for staffing?
We're just about in line. And last year, towns, some gave 4 up to 10. Pretty consistently across the board. It's been a little slower getting numbers this year as towns are figuring all this out. And the merit raise is the entire raise. That's not there's no step or grade or anything beyond that. That is the entire amount. And the amount budgeted includes all the benefits associated with that. So that's the entire cost.
Mark.
Can you talk about the board's appetite for raising money through capital reserves versus bonding?
When we were talking about roads, at this point, the thought is that we'll have to be relying on bonding for the most part. Some capital reserves to say maintain what we fix up, but it would be bonds like on Briar Hill.
And what about for your other areas where you have capital reserves, smaller items where you're saving for the future and short term without having to pay interest down the road?
We try to fund all of that through the capital reserves, like fire equipment.
I'm not sure it's a consensus on the board, but there certainly has been discussion, and there's at least members that have strong feelings that bonding for roads is the way to go, given the inflationary drivers of construction costs. So
And probably the size of the need. It's not.
And the size of the need. But as Ken said, there's been no talk of bonding other things.
Mark? Yeah.
A couple things, Ken, on page 13. And you speak to election administration.
Sure. Think of how many elections we have coming up in 2024 versus 2023.
Okay, so this is 2024 is just a normal election year, or maybe a typical election year.
It's presidential primary, town meeting, state primary, presidential election.
Makes sense. Thank you. And then on, I just wanted to ask a little bit about the fund balance on page 3. And just to maybe understand a little bit more about how the select board thinks through that number. You know, it can vary quite a bit from year to year. And so, yeah, I'm just maybe just to shed a little bit more insight on how you all landed at 350.
We don't want to drain that account so that the following year would, potentially result in a tax jump. But what we've been seeing over, if you look at the table over the last 7 years, something in the $300,000 range, $350,000 range seemed to be consistent with other years. And if you think in terms of what our operating revenues are and our expenses, 300,000 is probably less than 3%. So we're in effect budgeting quite tightly.
Thanks.
I have a question. And I'll try and frame it appropriately. Could you talk to us about the select board's elimination of the $10,000 appropriation to carry out the housing committee's suggested code audit?
There were actually two requests sort of along that line. The other was 15,000, I believe, from the for regulatory audit and the planning board, and I sort of, let's say, saw the 15,000, the 10,000 are they somewhat going after the same issue?
Like duplicate.
Yeah, so we left the 15 in and dropped the 10. We did last Monday's select board hearing. There was a lot of discussion about how planning, zoning, conservation, housing, they all work together. And my understanding is that the heads of those different committees are going to try to work together and and then come to the select board. So I'd say we realize there's something to be done, and more coordination is beneficial.
Right.
Debbie, I just want to make sure if you have questions, just do the hand raise thing and we'll get you in.
Or smile.
All right, will do. Thank you. I do have a question. Can you hear me? I'm breaking in and out. I'm sure it's good to ask questions on this. On the fund balance, it looks like we'll have available for the 2025, 165,446. I'm on the page 3 of the fund balance. Again, I'm going back to that. So on that, I guess my concern is as costs continue to increase, how would we look at lowering or assisting in lowering taxes as we use up this fund balance? And we're leaving ourselves with the 165 for 2025.
The 165 estimate is assuming that our budget estimates for revenue in 2024 exactly match the budget. And normally we get revenue somewhat higher than projected. And similarly for expenses, let's say there may be some vacancies during the year. So I would expect that 2024 expenses will come in somewhat under budget. So that would be adding to the 165.
I just want to be clear that the 165 is available fund balance to use. It is not our fund balance. If you look, the 5% retainage, which is 1,594,000, that is actually the minimum DRA requires. And because this is Hopkinton and people pay their taxes and we don't have cash flow issues, 5% works great. But that money includes uncollected taxes. It's not a pot that's sitting somewhere. And as they explained last week, we'll start our budget year January 1. We'll vote our budget in March. And really, we don't collect any money on that until June and July. So that's what that is. So just to be clear, this is available funds beyond that 5%. Just so we're not running the total fund balance to 165, because we have to pay the precincts in the school whether we collect taxes or not.
Thank you.
So the fund balance is on
Thank
paper.
you, Neil.
It's not necessarily cash. Some of it's in cash. Right. Yeah. And that cash presumably dwindles in the first months of the year before the first tax payments come in. Thanks, Neil. Good use of the word dwindle.
So
Thank you.
please pay your taxes promptly.
Right.
We do a $1.7 million transfer once a month to the schools, so which we have to do so they can pay their bills.
I just have a quick question.
Thank you for that
No
explanation.
staff this year, if we didn't add to the ambulance and we didn't add the position at the transfer station, what would that do to the percent increase in the budget? How much would it reduce it? 13%?
About 7. It's about
73,000 when you're done, assuming no additional
The net.
savings. Yeah, for the two. Because the part of the ambulance is offset by fees. Because what's happened more than 70 times this year, there's a second ambulance call while the full-time crew is out. And if you can't get people there to respond, then you can't bill for those calls. And then it was about 43,000 for the transfer station, assuming no cost savings or anything there. So
Yeah.
what's
so-
that 1%?
So 70,000 is a little bit over 1%.
1.5%. Okay. Thank you.
Just to follow up on that is, so I notice on, it's page 8, it's the ambulance revenue. So 23 budget is 449.5. Estimated 507. Does that, is that 507 estimating, based in part on the additional?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other thing on that is, like, who sets the ambulance fee? Is that set by the town? And If so, like, because I know that they vary a lot. Ambulance by ambulance, some are county, some are town. Like, if we change those fees, like, where do we fall, in terms of the market?
If-
For that?
If we change those fees, for the most part, we'll receive the same money because of the way medical billing works. You take what Medicare pays,
Right,
and most, not all,
right.
of people using the ambulance service are on Medicare. So that's the rate that you have to accept.
But that's not is that the rate? But that's not.
No,
the
we
rate.
bill, I think it might be 150% of the Medicare rate. It's
Hmm.
whatever the going rate is.
Because there certainly are calls where people are not on Medicare or Medicaid and.
And
either
their
don't
insurance
have
companies
Private pay, or they have
are
private
billed.
insurance.
Yeah.
Where they get med pay to cover it, and
Yep.
so they might.
And
Okay.
I think it's 150%. It's a fairly standard rate. And I know at one point we increased the percentage.
Thank you.
So that was I just added the numbers, so that's $116,000 to add those positions, roughly.
And
The
then
ambulance.
you have to net out the additional revenue.
Said that 73,000 already was netted out, right? The ambulance.
No, it's
Oh,
not.
that was
It's
gross.
it's not netted. Ambulance adds about 30,000 because it's 70,000 total minus the 40,000 in additional revenue. So that nets out at 30.
Okay.
And the transfer station is 43. When you add the additional hours and the benefits.
Okay,
So 73 is the net.
And that accounts to the grand total is 13.27 now, and it would go down to a 1.5% to 11.77. I'm looking at the net effect to the taxpayer if we don't hire new people.
It would be in the above 11.5.
Might be easier to look at it in terms of the operating budget rather than the total tax. In terms of thinking about, Rich, your question around percent change off. Because this is an operating expense. So the operating budget's up 6.2%.
Yep.
568,000.
Yep.
It would be up 500,000 essentially without those two changes. Whatever that percentage is.
Although technically the operating budget would drop more, but you have to go up above and also drop the revenue. So,
Right, thank
which
you.
is
Yeah, right. Yes, appreciate that.
And also, wouldn't there be this would be probably harder to calculate, but increased revenue from the transfer station hours as well?
We
For all
did
the
not,
reasons that we just discussed.
yeah, we did not include any there because we just don't know. But that's the hope.
So there's
yes.
some value added to that position in terms of revenue as well.
But potentially revenue, potentially expense reduction,
One of the,
or
yeah,
both.
6-1, yeah.
Yeah, and then just, wanted to emphasize that if we look at the operating budget, the 6.2% increase, remember $275,000 of that is due to the road bond. So if we take that out, we're more like.
Yeah.
So I'm very comfortable with the operating budget for sure.
It seems like, just a comment, it seems like between the CIP and between the road bond and the CIP, it's like vehicles and roads. It's like really driving this budget, like the increase.
It's that and inflation.
The ambulance, the dump truck this year, the truck next year, the trailers, the
Mhm.
pump truck and the ambulance.
Yeah.
Is a big piece.
Well, I'm just looking at it from the standpoint of the person opening their their tax bill.
Absolutely.
My next door neighbor, on Little Tookie Road told me last week that when she opened up her tax bill for this last 6-month period, she cried. And this is going to be higher than that by quite a bit.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, it's painful, no question about it.
Other questions for Ken and Neil?
Yeah, so one of the things they brought up at our presentation last week was the zero-based budgeting. We had talked a little bit about it. At the end, I think, of last budget cycle, what is the select board's position of requiring one department a budget cycle? Starting with the one with the largest budget to do a zero-based budgeting exercise?
I think that we go line item by line item now through every budget. As I mentioned, that we reduced amounts in 30 line items. We've looked at the staffing levels. We're making changes. So I think in effect, we're doing the same thing.
You cut out about $500,000 from department requests.
Including the CIP.
Okay. I think the nice thing about that kind of budgeting format is it's a discipline where it forces everyone to kind of go back and justify from the ground up everything that's being spent, almost like having a fresh pair of eyes looking at things.
Yeah, and there are, I think, different ways to accomplish the same thing. But going.
Other questions, comments?
On that, I'll just follow up on that note. It's not a request for the select board. It's a request. I know I'm going to say request. It's an inquiry as to whether a department would start their budget that way.
Yes, I think the select board would have to ask a department head to prepare their budget that way I'll just throw out an example that I had somebody ask me about our cruiser schedule.
Mhm.
When was the last time we looked at the necessity of what cruises are we running during what hours? And when was the last time we actually looked at those numbers? That was just one, that's an example of a dozen that, I've heard in the last month or so, but the thing with the zero-based budget is it forces you to go back instead of just accepting things like they've always been done and justifying your budget from the first dollar to the amount that you're requesting for the year. And I think, that's why a lot of people that I think do budgets for a living view that as a very powerful budgeting tool.
Along that line would be for each, and how this would work for each department, but just say for the highway department, what drives their machinery? And one of the things that drives it, I think, is the fact that you've set a goal for doing the route on a snowstorm every 3 hours or every 4 hours, and it takes X amount of pieces of equipment to do that. Now, that's one goal for that season. Now, that same equipment is used obviously for building and constructing and repairing roads. But I think the main goal of the highway department is to have safe roads and bridges. But I think the main thing driving that amount of equipment, correct me if I'm wrong, is what is the schedule that Hopkinton residents expect on clearing the storms? We're sort of spoiled by having almost a clear road policy. If we waited till instead of 3 inches, it was 6 inches or 8 inches, that would be a whole different game as to how many trucks you need to do it and how many people you need to hire to supplement the trucks that we currently have. But it might be interesting to follow up on yours is to have each department state what the goal is of what that department's about, the police department. How many do they need? How many cruisers do they need to have X amount of level of service 24 hours a day? If we don't have it 24 hours a day, and I believe we still do, then you could cut down on the number of personnel probably and the number of cruisers. But I think we have an outstanding, all three of our major departments are outstanding. Fire calls, ambulances, the same kind of thing, but state that goal so that people might question. It's the same thing as a school. What's the size of the classroom? Well, how many students can be in the classroom? That drives a lot of their policy. It might be a good exercise to do that. That might answer some of what you're asking, Steve.
We could certainly provide that information. I think that those levels have not changed in many, many years. That's if you want to do things for less, I think the goal of the board has been to keep level service. You certainly could plow every road. We could cut it in half and have them done every 6 hours. We'll have to get more people to answer the phones, but other than that,
But again, I think the fact that I agree with you that we haven't changed that philosophy since I've been around, and that's a long time. But I don't think 99% of the people don't know what that is, and maybe we ought to articulate it.
Fair comments.
Along those lines, as a longtime town resident, I appreciate the goal of keeping the services the same, but we are, I think, approaching the threshold where we may have to start looking at a reduction of services in some instances,
or at least not making services bigger.
And that's why anything that we can do to encourage the departments to really take a look at what they're doing and why they're doing it would be a valuable along what Rich is saying, for sure.
Other comments, questions? Debbie?
I'm good.
So I guess I'm just thinking out loud here. I think last year, would it be like take a pulse or something like that on what people are thinking in terms of discussion or? And I guess the second part of my thought is I had sort of set this agenda out, but I wonder if we want to kind of discuss it now and get some information on the other budgets and then see where we stand on it. So we, at least we have some sense as to where school looks like it's coming in the precincts. I'm kind of watching that Hopkinton precinct pretty closely.
Just wait for it. I got your printout right here.
Would you like my bulletproof vest?
I'm just gonna figure out the percent change here. So I just have this dollar number.
So I'm just wondering what people think about what makes sense. Maybe that's not a good way to do that, but. Like, do we want to have some discussion now, or do we want to get some more information and then kind of discuss things once we've heard from the other three? Anybody have a preference?
I go for Rob.
My preference would be to let this sort of, sift a little bit, have some time to go through the documents and think about it. Do a little bit more just examining, very thorough report, and then come back at our next meeting and I'd be more prepared to comment one way or the other.
That's fair. And then that brings me to, would that be, so we can meet again next week? Or we can meet at our next scheduled meeting to discuss this. which is second week of January.
Sorry, is this school presenting?
Second week of January, school presents, right?
But that would be our formal.
Yep.
Yeah,
Right.
I can certainly give you updates,
Right.
you know, as to where we're at and how things are going.
So what do people think? Do we want to come back next week to just focus on this, or do we want to come back in January and hear the presentation from the school and discuss everything in January?
Probably ought to get the comments out now. If we're here, the topic is
Yep.
on the table. Get the
Yep.
comments out if they have them, and we'll move on if we don't.
Okay. Which brings me back to the original question, which is, do we want to hear from the other three and then?
Yes.
Okay, so let's do that. So let's do that.
May I ask one quick question? And Neil, did I see that presentation last week? The county rate had actually gone down last year, which was counterintuitive, but
It might have changed a penny or two.
okay.
I don't think it changed.
But no increase.
I don't think so. And a lot of that may have to do with where valuations are at.
Gotcha.
So
And when do we get those numbers for the next year? Is it much later in the tax cycle?
So for next year, we will be doing the revow in the year and hopefully, ideally by September 1, but it probably will be mid-September to October. Hopefully like August hearings will be, people will receive their new values and hearings will be, they can schedule appointments with the assessors to go through it. So in reality, it's not relevant, but probably the tax rate will be half of what it is now, but assessed value will be double what it is now, which is the same. It doesn't change how much your bill is.
All right, so maybe taking Ken out of the hot seat, we can hear from Kentucky recent.
On the schedule, it shows a
Thank you,
financial
Neil.
update. Are you expecting a budget? Because I have a budget.
I'm not expecting anything. Whatever you got for
Hey,
us.
you got nothing.
Got a
then.
budget, let's go. Go with the budget.
I want to know what you got.
All right. We'll have a handout of this proposed budget for next year. I'll run down through it and I'll make some comments as I go. And you can ask questions as I go through it, if you like. A second item down the warrants, that's the money we raised by the sale of water. And we're looking to increase the rates this coming year. So we're at jacking up the amount of water sales by 45,000. Going down further down, halfway down the page, we have the superintendent line, a decrease of $66,000. That's because the person we had hired to do that job has resigned. And so we've got that's a takeout there, but you'll see a little bit later on, we had to add in money to cover that. Going down a little bit further, we administrative assistant, which was a job that we had put in the last year's budget, but we didn't do it, so we took it out this year. That was Steve Lux basically helping out, and he's not there. So that was a decrease. 2 lines down further, we finally found a clerk, Melissa Hughes. So we added $1,500 there, so that's a net savings of $300. Going to the next page, down near the bottom. Maintenance and service. We've jacked that up another 6,500 just to cover breaks and whatever. We had some substantial breaks this past year. So we added a little more money to cover that and upgrades that we know are coming. Down a little bit further, we have a decrease in the electricity cost at the Main Street Main Street tank of minus $4,000, and going down a few more lines. The electricity used at the main plant on Bound Tree, that's down. And we think that that's down because we used so much electricity pumping water when we had that major break back last summer. We lost over 1 million gallons there that had to be processed, and that was just unexpected. So that hopefully the savings will be there. Down at the bottom is the big change. to replace the superintendent that resigned, we've had to contract a company called Penachuk, a water service company. They're a big company here in New Hampshire. And their services, we think, and the contract's being basically signed right about now. That'll be $108,000 to cover that function. But it's costing us more money than obviously having the superintendent, but that's what we had to do. On the third page, the water treatment line, the 4335 shows a jump of 100,000, but that's basically the Penachuk impact when you get down to the total line. The next line down that we need to talk about is the vehicle reserve, because we were sharing a pickup truck with the town under the sewer part of it. We're no longer sharing that vehicles because we're not sharing that person. So that vehicle reserve that we were putting in each year is $6,000. We won't do that this year, so that's zeroed out. So the total expenses have basically gone up 37,000, but we're covering that by the increase in the water rates. So the bottom line, all the way down at the bottom is when you summarize it, it's pretty good. We're actually reducing the amount of taxes to be raised, and the rate is going down a little bit, 6 cents. Nice work. Now, in addition to that, the major things that we got going on, as I mentioned at one time, or I guess last time I presented anything with the precinct, was that we have 3 major studies going on that are funded through DES grants. One for $50,000 to figure out what the upgrades to the main plant are going to be. And that's going to be substantial, we think, but we have no idea how much. Could be 20,000, could be 100,000. So that's a real mystery of that one. And the other 2 grants are going to help us define what the system is all about, where the pipes are, what the status of the life of them is, and when they're going to need to be replaced. And that'll help us really define what the rate increase should be. Right now, we're just sort of winging it as to what we're guessing it should be. The current rate right now is 0.0045. If we raised it to 0.0055 per gallon, that would increase $45,000 in revenue. We'd rather do it, the precinct commissioners think, rather than just raising the taxes, is to raise it through the usage of water, which is something people have control over. They don't really have control over what their assets are worth. And so the logic of that. Any questions?
I think you answered it.
Me too.
Currently, your philosophy is to replace the pipes when they break there, and there's not like a plan to replace X feet of pipes when the roads are being done or in sequence or anything.
That's where we want to be. Right now, we're replacing when they break.
Right.
Cedar Street's a classic example. That's been in terrible shape for 5-6 years now. And it really needs to be done all in sync with the sewer, needs to be redone, the water needs to be done, and the road itself needs to be done all at once. So that's a classic example of that. But we should be in a position after the study to really get into a situation where we know where we should be replacing. Now, the whole state required lead study is going to also impact that, because the precinct, along with every other precinct in the state, has got to define where lead pipe is. And if it's there, it needs to be replaced. So there'll be some of that. We don't know where it is or what it is at this point. I guess that's the story at this point. Any questions?
Is there any attempt to hire another superintendent, or?
There was a great effort to do this.
After the one that left, like.
Right, no,
currently
those,
it's-
Neil, I think, it's hard to find them, and we didn't get any results. I guess you had one that was, for the sewer part, was ready to go, and then he just didn't show up or quit before he even got there.
We do have a candidate now, so,
Good.
but the precinct chose to break away.
Right.
And not They wanted their own person, so.
Oh, we haven't been able to find that person, so this contract for a year will.
Yep.
Well, we can decide then whether that's a good marriage or whether it's not, and whether we want to go back to a person. When you don't have a person there, you lack that, just that real connect with the customers. So ideally, my position would be ideally, we would have a person. We had a good one. Sam Currier he knew his stuff and he was good, but he was spread too thin. And I guess that leads to another thing that, we share in the town. When the state studied how many people it should take to run the sewer side and run the water side, each side should have 2 full-time people. And we had a half of one on each side. The town is, they got the full-time, so they've doubled their situation. And by hiring this company, we've improved it, but I don't think we've gotten to the point where we have that same commitment or same ability to connect with people and the system. They're basically going to do what is required by law. And, we'll do all of that stuff, but we still have a lot of things that we need to be done. And these 3 studies should really allow us to focus on where we need to go. And it could be some really significant changes.
Thank you, Don.
Welcome.
Any other?
I have a quick question for you. So if I'm paying my water bill in that precinct, which I don't, because I'm not in your precinct.
Say that again, I'm not hearing you.
Is my drop in my tax rate of 6 cents, am I better off with the increase?
You say you're in the precinct? Or
So
not?
you're telling me that there's an increase in the water rate, so people are gonna pay more for their water,
Correct.
but there's a decrease in the tax rate.
Correct.
Am I better off or am I worse? That's my question.
You don't live in the precinct.
I know.
So not making a bit of difference, but if you did,
Because they pay water and they don't pay taxes.
Right. maybe that's where he's getting it.
No, I'm just curious. So,
Well, again, the philosophy is that you can regulate how much water you use to some degree. You can't regulate what your property is valued at. So we're thinking, it's like a
you're hoping it brings
state
about some
income,
conservation.
it's like an income tax or a sales tax.
But if I use the same amount of water,
Yep.
am I gonna be worse off, even though we got a decrease in my tax rate?
I don't know.
The math homework.
Yep. Well, it depends on how much water you use, I guess.
No, same amount of water.
Same amount of water.
Right, but it depends on how much you use.
Of your property. They're spending more money, so you must.
You understand the question, right?
That's an economist question. I don't understand that. I'm an engineer.
Will somebody please tell the cows that they need to conserve water? Drink less.
You make less money that way. You don't wanna do that.
Right, water becomes milk, right?
Milk is what, 90% water?
Other questions for Don? All right. Thank you, Don. Moving on. Hopkinton.
Would you take one and pass it down?
Do we have a question? Do I have an answer?
Yeah. Hey, Debbie. Last time you asked me a question, which was, or somebody asked me a question, which was, how much do people pay on average for the water in the Hopkinton Village precinct? And it depends on your house because they charge based on your faucets, not on usage. But on average, it's $900 a year. And Thomas pays $1,080 a year, but I bet he has more faucets than most of the other people in the precinct. But I hope that answers your question. I don't know how that relates to the Kentucky side where they actually charge per actual usage and the average per household, but that's what I got from our treasurers. $900 a year is the average.
Thank you. It's interesting.
Sure. So as you can see here, it's small beer compared to the other numbers we're discussing, but the Hopkinton Village Precinct is budgeting an increase of $736 for next year. Budget over budget, which is an increase of 2.45%. The budget drivers are an increase in how much QuickBooks costs, as well as adding an electrical meter over at the fire station by the crack. And we raised the water rates, so now the precinct has to pay more for the water that we use in Veterans Park to water the flowers. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Nice to see the clock winding rates have not gone up.
Also, we have several people cross-trained on that now, just in case.
Still write twice a day.
There was a little mention previously about conservation, and obviously meters are a way to promote conservation. Is there any thought of going to a metered system?
I'd be happy to ask. I don't know. That's a good question, whether or not the front-loaded costs of changing it out would be too much of a burden, but I will bring that back to the precinct and ask whether or not it's ever been discussed.
And is there any capacity issues with the water?
Not now that we have done this major increase in the storage tanks. We were required to do so by the Department of Environmental Services, and they increased, I think it was, the storage tanks used to hold 3,600 gallons and now it holds 30,000 gallons. So we don't get anywhere near the capacity that we now have. From what I've been told by Rick, who is the head of the water board, we could double the amount of water that we're pulling and we would still not have a decrease in pressure.
Rich, if you want to come get your water here, you pay by the faucet.
Or I could just get a really long hose.
Bring the tanker over.
Or bring the cows out.
How cute would that be?
They would welcome the cows in Hopkinton Village.
400 cows in a line. Yeah, okay.
Then they wouldn't have to mow the grass over at Harold Martin, right?
Or fertilize it.
They'll leave some presents behind. That's cute.
Other questions for Vicky? All right. Hearing none. Thank you, Vicky. We're on to the school.
Still thinking about faucets. Sorry. So we are most likely gonna bring our budget to a vote before our board next week. So our process back in October, we did our first round where the department heads came with their line item budgets, and we had our general meeting and they explained their increases, decreases, rationales, etc. I think one of the things that I would like this committee to think about is whether or not next year when we do that, that might be a good joint meeting so that everybody is hearing similar information. I think one of the things that I got out of the meeting the other night was better communication makes things better for everybody. And that is where really you learn a lot about what is going on and where people are spending money and where their needs are. So anyway, food for thought for the committee to think about.
And just on that point, meetings Tuesday at 5:30 at Maple Street, right?
Yes.
Coming up.
Yeah, coming up.
Yeah.
So that was our first round, and then our finance committee met and asked Mr. Flynn to reduce that number by a significant margin, 800,000 to $1 million. And then they came back just about hitting that bar. And part of our goal going into this year was to have a relatively flat operational budget. So taking away salaries and benefits, that things would be pretty level. And that's really where we ended up at this point. So, I mean, we still have to verse and vote next week, but right now we're at about 7.2%. And the lion's share of that is salaries, 1.6%. Healthcare, we got whacked again pretty hard, 2.66. And then in our operational budget, the big driver that was up that we really can't control are those special ed costs, which was 2.2. So when you take everything out, take special ed out, and you take out the salaries and the benefits piece, mostly healthcare, the operating budget is up 0.7. So less than 1% increase. So I think we did a pretty good job in that realm. Then after our last meeting, we had a discussion about revenue and how we would meet those needs. So part of what you'll see in our presentation is where the changes have come. And there really aren't a lot of changes from the state. And then we talked about how we're going to use our trust to offset those taxes. And at our last meeting, we discussed $400,000 from our Article 10. Just get that right piece of paper up. So we had a benefits trust. So if you remember a few years ago, during COVID, nobody used their health insurance. So we got a lot of money back and we created that trust and put all this money in. One of the things that drives our healthcare costs is our usage, not necessarily our plan, but our usage. So simply put, we're at 141%, which means that for every $100 we give them, we spend 141. So, if insurance is a bet and right now they're losing, so our rates are going up. So once we did that, and then 150,000 from the anticipated fund balance at the end of the year, which is currently at about 342,000, but still relatively early in the game. So our tax rate, once that comes in, is right now looking at about $1.70 without warrants. And we'll have a discussion about warrants at our meeting next week. So I gave you all of those department school budgets by line. I gave you the most recent revenue sheet. The monthly financial is in there. Trying to remember what else I sent, but I don't have my computer, so I can't see it. I think that was most of it. So if there's anything specific.
You want that?
Oh, and then the other piece that I did.
I printed it all out.
Should be on the Chromebook too, right?
Yeah. Oh, was the changes, and it looks like this, by department. So you have curriculum, special ed, tech, facilities, and then each school and their increase within their department. So for instance, just using Harold Martin School. So you can see their increase is actually down $19,000, 208. So they're a negative 1935. Now, as you're perusing through in your spare time, which I know it's just what everybody's doing, you'll see curriculum is up. So a lot of those budget transfers were money that was spent at the school level for resources was put into the curriculum line because there's a curriculum coordinator that does that. So you can see the increase or decrease by category, and then you can see the percentage change by the overall budget on the far right side.
Which document are you referring to?
It's-
There's about 20 of them in here.
Yeah, there's a lot in there, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, can you just give me the name of the
Yeah,
document?
you can. So it'll say at the very bottom, expense by department and school in
Got it.
log.pdf.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then there's a summary of the budget increases. So that there's two documents there that are in our second session. And again, in the presentation, this will all coalesce nicely, I hope. But talking about the changes that were made and where they were made.
This is a new document, I assume. I don't remember seeing this last year.
Which one?
This one you're talking about, the changes.
Yeah, this is something, because I was curious. This was me in finance committee playing with where it is
I think
specifically.
that's a good sheet.
This is a really helpful sheet.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yep.
And part of, so I think the question should be asked is, why did you think you could go into this year and have an objective of being flat? And one of the things that, as we looked at year over year spending, and it came up tonight when Ken was talking about his, what was your budget and then what was your actual? So when you look at that, that fund balance piece, people were asking for more money and not spending all of it. So the hope was that we could take some risk and say, perhaps you can make it work. You can move things around, but you can make it work within that number using last year's numbers. And that's kind of the basis to where it began.
That's a question, Rob. I
Yep.
want to be like really sensitive to how I ask this, but I was trying to deduce and couldn't. The driver in special education, is that additional students coming to the?
Right. So we always have to be careful when we talk about special ed,
Right.
because there's lots of privacy laws. So essentially it comes down to either new students who have been identified or new students who have been outplaced. Outplacements are very, very expensive. Cost of transportation alone can be $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, and then the placement itself. And, you know, my wife who's taught special ed for her entire life, I think about the two key words in special ed, most appropriate and least restrictive environments. So that team makes those decisions. And just so, and Mike can talk about this when he's here, but in special ed, it is a team of people that derive that IEP, that 504. And that's the wild card that we just don't know. And, you know, for me, when we're talking about state funding and all of that business, when someone in the legislature has a bill going forward, that it should be the state's responsibility to pick up the cost of external special education. So not so much what's happening within your district, but if you have to send students out, I mean, I think the boundary lines should be the we is New Hampshire, not the we is Hopkinton or Bow or elsewhere. It's just, you know, if you're a small municipality, that is very, very difficult to conquer.
Yeah.
Right.
So education for me on that, when, what are these outplacement? Like, are they like private special ed focused educational centers?
Yeah, so that's where I really can't answer those things, because it's easy to associate where a student might be outplaced to the student in a small place. But I can tell you that, yes, it
Just
would
general,
be, yeah,
high level.
it
Yeah.
could be to, could be a residential school. It could be a day school that they are going to. So those are usually the two parameters that happen.
I remember years past, there were two examples that were, in hindsight, I talked about. One was a child who had to go to a school in Connecticut as a full-time resident, and that was like $150,000 a year. Another one was taken to the coast every day with a bus, with an attendant, and every day, and that was, I think, $50,000. So, I mean, it's astronomical what some of these costs can be. And you just never know. It's a total crapshoot coming in.
And I'm not trying to imply there's anything that we should be doing about those costs. I just am curious. I just didn't know. Thank you.
And it's also this, just to follow up on your point, I mean, it's the state that regulates these facilities, that has control over what is out there to meet the needs. So,
Yeah,
so
so
to say that I agree with the
Right.
idea that,
the most
you know,
of
the state
special
has
ed,
more control, so the state really ought to be paying the
Right.
tab on.
so most of special ed law changed in 1994 when the federal government required people to meet the needs of students with disabilities. And then that came down and it was never funded. So then it came to the state, and then,
Yeah.
it ultimately fell to the burden of cities and towns.
Is there a technology trust?
Yes.
Yes.
So, sorry,
Yes, go ahead.
I'm wondering why paying for new servers isn't coming out of the technology trust.
So, interesting question, because we just had, as we were discussing what should happen in our warrants for this upcoming. Most of the trusts are pretty clearly identified as to what they do, right? VIP, vehicle trust, benefit trust, etc. The tech trust was created during COVID when we got flush with all kinds of COVID cash from the federal government, and we bought all those Chromebooks. But we've never really had a conversation about the long term. Is the tech trust like a CIP for technology, or is it a crisis trust, like something our server went down and we have to replace it and we don't have the funds. So that's something that I've asked to be a discussion at our board meeting on Tuesday, coming out of the finance committee, to wrap our heads around that and think about what it is, because I think it changes how we fund it, and then how we access it. For instance, in the special ed trust, and I can give you this, but Michelle did a nice 10-year spreadsheet as to the inflow and outflow in each one of those trusts. And, you know, some special ed has only been used twice in the last 10 years. One for a student placement and one for an ADL room at Maple Street, which perhaps should have come out of CIP. I don't know. But anyway, that trust we really think of as a crisis trust. You know, we don't want to be funding special ed costs out of the special ed trust. It's January, we get a new student, we already have our backs against the wall, and we turn to that trust. But the tech trust is another question that we'll have as a discussion in terms of what it is and how we should use it.
So just along those lines, I noticed that every in the technology programmatic budget, every replaced computers line increased. And I'm wondering, is that because we're planning on making more purchases or because the technology is more expensive?
That I will have to ask Matt Stone about. I remember the conversation, but I don't remember the details. My recollection is it's probably a little bit of both. And we've talked about, you know, what should be the cycle with Chromebooks. How often, at what quality level do you buy? Because, you know, you can buy down the food chain. You can buy that $5 hammer at Home Depot. That's probably a bad idea because the $12 one's actually going to last you longer. And we've also had discussions about how we should fund that, you know, whether or not in some school districts, students can purchase their Chromebooks at the end, or they pay a fee towards them. It's a little bit of a difficult, cumbersome thing. We've stayed away from that at this point, but yeah.
The $1.70, is that what you said?
Yes.
What percent changes that?
I'm sorry.
What percent change it? What is that on a percentage?
7.27%.
Okay.
And it would, you know, the salaries and benefits side is 4.75% of that. And again, the operations side is 2.52, but special ed is 2.23 of the 2.57. So we're really small in the other parts of the operations. And in regard to your long-term planning, you and I should talk, because one of my other little play projects was looking at creating a document over the last 10 years of all the changes by category, salaries, benefits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if that fits what you were doing, but I will share that with you and what you're doing. So
I haven't doing anything in the
Okay.
last month.
Well, I heard there was a request, but I didn't know what the request
I didn't make the
was.
request because I wanted to work with you, Rob, first to get the inflation indices sorted out. And also Michelle and Mike and you are in the midst of budgeting, and we didn't need it for this year. So I thought I would just defer it until like February.
Sounds like a good idea.
I'm sure we would like to see Michelle's hard work on that, what comes in and out of all the trusts, if you wouldn't mind sharing it.
More than happy to do that.
Rob, could you explain a little bit more about why the healthcare costs are variable with usage?
Yeah, so, you know, I didn't really even think about this until I got on the school board. You just assume you pay for healthcare and it is what it is, but it's just like with your auto insurance. If you buy auto insurance and you never get in an accident, it stays sort of flat, but if you have 2 accidents in a year, it goes up. Apparently health insurance works exactly the same way. So one of our things that we asked Michelle, now we're locked in by contract to health trust at this point. And there are really only 2 options for us in New Hampshire, health trust and school care. But again, in finance committee, we asked Michelle, we got to do our due diligence and see what else is out there. So she went to school care. explained to them what we have with Health Trust and what our options were, and we've got 3 different plans that people can access. Some of which the school pays a higher percentage and then you pay the difference. School care won't give us a quote because they won't take us on because of our usage. So,
Okay.
Wow.
and you know, I don't know if that's just demographics or what it is, but
So our usage is higher?
yeah, so people that are, you know, need to access their medical care, we are higher than what I guess would be the norm. So that's driving our costs a bit.
Is this 141? Is that the mod rate, as I remember that?
Yeah, I think that's the term.
And again, your goal is to be less than 100.
Yeah.
And
Then they make money.
And you have 2 or 3 patients that have long-term, example, cancer situations. That can drive the equivalent of 30 people who are just normal. So
Yeah.
that goes in ebbs and flows. Some of it, businesses control it by being very restrictive on, in the old days, as to who you could go see and whatever. But,
Right.
you know, it's just tough. You get a high mod, you say nobody wants you.
Yeah. So,
And it's the town and the school, the pool, where the same.
in other towns as well, right? Is it just the 2 of us?
Yeah, for our rating, it's just the 2 of us.
Well, thanks a lot.
We used our version. So, probably we should stay away from discussing that further, but that's what insurance is for.
That's very
So if there are any other, I don't know if we're gonna meet next week or not, but if there are any other documents that you want or things you want me to bring to the table, happy to do that.
I would just like to request it being in paper. Could I just have one document for one presentation for myself in paper? Because I have a hard time following it on a computer.
Yeah.
Especially when we start switching between screens.
So for the budget presentation itself, or for it just in general, would you like?
Just in general, the final year-end documents.
I too would like a favor.
Okay.
It's age related.
Big bread.
Yeah.
And you know, for next year, I can just bring that folder with me and put them side by side.
Sure.
That was name related.
No, it is, could be. It's my son, so.
Other questions, comments? Debbie?
She's frozen in place.
All right. Thank you, Rob.
Welcome.
Thank you, Ron.
So now I think maybe it's appropriate to have some discussion of what people think about where we are. I guess the one point of order is I know you, Bonnie, you've been waiting here patiently. So maybe what we can do is I'll go out of order and have if you want to come up and we can do public comment and then we can have discussion. I think I had been asked by another member of the public to move public comment to after other business, but I think I'm gonna do that. So if any of the public would like to come up and address the board, now would be a good time. Just state your name and.
We have public on Zoom too.
I know, I saw that too.
Norm's
I'm
got
giving
his hand
preference
raised.
to the in-person. Live. Yeah, and for those on Zoom, if you just do the hand raising function, we'll queue you up. Norm, we see you.
Thank you. Thanks for all the work that you guys do. This is a lot.
And if you just say your name.
Oh, Bonnie Christie, 302 Smithfield Road, Kentucky.
Thank you.
Thanks for everything you do. It's better you than me. I'm really appreciative of all the work that you put into this. This is going way back to beginning discussions, but I wanted to respond to something that you were saying, Rob, about this is getting into the green bags. And you cited an old study that had been done by some students, probably in your class at the high school, about the correlation between the green bags and the recycling rate. Is that what it was? Yeah. And I would just offer a different perspective, and this just goes to a discussion of why it's important to get the revenue from the green bags. And I can say that there is a very strong correlation between decreased use of the green bags and increased tonnage of what we send to the landfill. Very strong correlation. And that goes hand in hand at the same time with decreased recycling rates. So less use of green bags, more waste going to the landfill, more costs to the taxpayers, and less recycling, which is less revenue to the town. And this is all independent. Our tipping fee varies from year to year, but it's all independent of that. And I think that I sent to Jonathan, and I don't know if I sent to anybody else, the NRRA report. You know about that report, Neil, that compared our transfer station with several others, maybe seven or eight other towns of about similar population size. And according to that report, we spend tens of thousands more to run our transfer station than other towns in similar situation. And all of those towns that we were being compared to, they all use a pay-by-bag program and they enforce it. They have compliance. Either that or they have mandatory recycling or both. So the point I wanted to make is it's not, the important thing is that we have some kind of unit-based pricing. It doesn't matter whether it's green bags or stickers, or you have a punch card, or you actually have to weigh your waste when you bring it in. You should be paying by the unit of the waste that you're taking to the landfill. And the way that we chose to do that was by the green bags. But if you don't enforce that, then you see what we end up with. The revenue from our green bags has been on a steady decline from a high of $102,699. That was in 2016. And a low of $17,106 in 2022. So not surprisingly, that correlates with our recycling rate, which the highest rate we ever reached was 22% of our entire waste load. We recycled 22% of that rather than sending it to the landfill or incinerator. And last year we were at a low of 13%. So there's a direct correlation, and the sale of the bags has gone down and down and down. So it would be interesting to have another study done by a class or anybody. And I've gotten all my numbers from the town reports. It's very hard. You know, this is very hard to follow the revenue from the green bags. There are a lot of blanks in the budget because it's, well, yeah. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that there are a lot of different ways of looking at that. So unit-based pricing is really important. And I really appreciated, Mark, that you brought up, I think your question was about having a compliance mindset in the management of the transfer station, because I do think that our transfer station, I don't know what the phrase is, where the revenue equals the expense. It's tax neutral to the town if we're bringing in the correct amount of revenue and paying for the waste as we should. We do need a more compliance-based staff, and I think that probably it starts with the select board. So yeah, that was pretty much what I wanted to say about that. And then I had another question, Don. This is about the Kentucky precinct and the water treatment. And I think you said that there are going to be some studies done about the water treatment plant and what needs to be done there.
Yes.
Is that right? Do you know if they will be looking at an option of going to getting our water from groundwater instead of surface water?
One of the studies.
Okay, because when we were doing our natural resource inventory, it occurred to us that we have some huge aquifers in town. And I was talking to a hydrologist who I believe he said that it's a lot cheaper to use groundwater because the treatment standards are different than if you're using surface water.
Correct.
So that would be awesome if we could find a cheaper way to do it. So thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a benchmark recycling rate that, because you said that.
Average in the state is 26%
Oh, my God.
in municipalities.
And is the report that she's referencing, is that something that can be
Yeah,
sent to the budget committee?
yeah.
You have it. right?
Oh, Neil
Yeah.
has- okay. So we can make it part of the.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is it possible to estimate, Neil, if Hopkinton was able to reach the average recycling, the state's average rate of 26%, what would that do to our costs? You know, what the tax benefit of that would be essentially.
That's just numbers. We could figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be worthwhile to understand. This is real. I mean, it's
Yeah.
pathetic that we're that low.
Yeah.
This is a town that should be able to do better. But forgetting the moral and ethical and environmental side of it, there's a dollars and cents equation that would be good to
Yeah.
understand.
And we're talking about overall use of the transfer station, right? For all users of the transfer station, not just Hopkinton, right?
I'm sorry, what's the
Like you wouldn't be
question?
able to separate out
Right.
Hopkinton from, so
Yeah.
it's.
One of the challenges.
Can I also just bring up Neil's comment earlier about how we're somewhat unique in that we take commercial or, I presume the commercial waste doesn't get parsed out between what's recyclable and what's not,
Yeah, we can recycle a lot of the commercial waste.
Okay. So I guess what I'm wondering is if we're unique in that we accept this commercial waste, does that put a finger on the scale of how much goes into the hopper versus the recycling base? It does.
Well, is that a change that happened? Because I mean, if we were previously at 22, that was 22 was the best year, 22%, did you say? Did you cite?
That is the percent that's recycled from
Right.
the municipal solid waste, which is just what goes in the hopper. The C&D is a different
Okay.
number. And of the report that I was referring to, I think there was only one other town that didn't accept C&D, construction and demolition waste. And our tonnage for both C&D and landfill waste is just way, it's like, whoa, what's going on here? Are we just a wasteful town, or are we just not managing properly? Or it's a bit of a mystery, but I think it's worth studying because we could be doing a lot better.
I was not referring to C&D at all, but the commercial trash that comes in and goes in the hopper.
Yeah, one thing we talked about was that I believe we have a 400-pound exemption that you can bring in, you can dispose of 400 pounds free. Does that sound right? And anything above that, if you're bringing it in your truck, you have to pay for, but that doesn't mean that you can't come in 3 times a day or, a dozen times a week with under 400 pounds and dispose of it for free. So
The
I think we had
I think
looked
the
at
ordinance is weekly.
weekly. So we, we're looking at whether we need to adjust that freebie and do more unit-based pricing for that as well.
Which I guess raises a question, if we're looking at raising the rates on the commercial trash, are we also looking at raising the rates that people pay on the recycling, not the construction waste? Is that part and parcel?
all the rates.
All the rates, okay, because really, I mean, that should be a profit center for us if we're accepting that material.
What is the enforcement? Is it a town ordinance? Is that the enforcement mechanism for somebody that is a Hopkinton resident and doesn't use a green bag?
So there's two ordinances. There's the refuge disposal ordinance, which does everything except green bags, and then there's a green bag ordinance.
And presume, and is it a fine? I assume it's a fine,
It is,
100 or something, and then subsequent offense would be higher.
yeah. I would have to, I don't want
Yeah,
to quote
some-
what it is,
some amount and then a
but there
higher for
is
subsequent.
up until you can also stop someone from using the facility at all if they're not compliant. Up to that, I think it's progressive.
Just curious. I assumed it's town ordinance, but
So Bonnie, I use empty trash, right? So that's not unit based at all, right? I have a quarterly amount that I pay and I can put up to 10 bags out in front of my house every week. And my rate doesn't change unless I go above that 10 bag limit. So just to be clear, that is not what you're referring to as best practices.
Correct. Does that sound right, Neil?
It does, but it's unit based when they deliver it to us.
Right.
Because we charge, so that would be how they do their pricing, but that's one area we do unit based
Right,
on what they
because they
bring
weigh in.
in. Yep.
And people who use empty trash don't have to use green bags. They're exempted from that.
Right.
That has changed.
What?
To that. That was not.
Right.
That was not the case up until
Last year.
I think it was whenever it was. It was since 2020 for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, very good.
I think we got Norm waiting patiently with his hand.
See if this works. Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me? I'm not sure if you can hear me or not. Raise your. Okay, I'm not sure if you guys can hear me. If you can raise your hand, because I'm not hearing anything on the screen at all. Okay, perfect. Awesome. Norm Gupel, 121 Amesbury Road. I just wanted to say, first off, I love this part of the season, budget season, where we have a discussion, in regards to budget for the town and for the school. And I just want to say thank you, Ken, for a clear presentation on the select board's budget. It's very tough to be able to bring an increase like that to the town, but I do believe and trust in our elected officials that some of the things that we need are warranted this year in order to improve our town. And it's very difficult being that hot seat, explaining what is required in order to maintain Hopkinton. I just want to say thank you, Ken and Neil, for a clear presentation tonight on your budget from the select board. Lastly, I just wanted to say to Rob, great job on an update. You did it in 2 minutes as opposed to 30 minutes that I would do. So great job doing that. And I look forward to you guys listening to the school board's presentation in the next couple of weeks. I definitely think that we worked hard in order to get you guys a good number when we vote on it. And I just want to say thank you guys for really asking the questions and digging deep into our budgets, because this is the time for the budget committee to ask and get clarification in order to decide what's best for the town. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Comments from the public. We see a few other people and participants. Just raise your hand. Going once, going twice. All right. We're going to close public comment and circle back to sort of general discussion of where we are, I think, which is appropriate.
I'll start. So because I want to go home, so I want to get on with.
Yep.
Ken, thank you. And Neil, I thought it was a really good presentation. I feel like the town and the select board have done a great job in terms of developing a budget that feels like it's, it's a lot. But it's well supported. You gave really clear explanations and rationales for the changes that the town is proposing on the staffing side and in terms of capital expenditures. So, there's nothing in there that I heard that I feel like, that there's not a good rationale. It's not a clear rationale. And so that's, I think that's your job, deliver a responsible, well-supported budget. I'm anxious about a 12 point, and I'm sure you are too, 12.7% increase in the tax rate.
In the budget.
Well, I was looking at the tax impact.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 12.7% increase. In terms of the tax impact overall, and I know that's driven largely by things that are somewhat beyond your control, capital expenditures. But I'm just, as you said, Rich, I think you put it well. I'm anxious for the people who are going to open their tax bill, and that's a big hit. And so, especially when wages are rising now, but they're not rising that fast. So, how I feel uncomfortably comfortable, I guess, or uncomfortably uncomfortable, something like that.
I think it's a Pink Floyd song.
Yes, I'm not numb yet, but if I don't stop talking, you'll all be numb. Anyway, so that's where my head is at. Thank you again for doing such a good job.
Well, thank you. And I agree, I'm uncomfortably comfortable too.
Could I ask a question real quick? So first of all, also thank you. The presentation was very good and very clear. You as well, Rob. I thought both of you did phenomenally this evening.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Do we have I know that you said that there's still a discussion on revenues. If there were no, I don't know how to ask the question, what ballpark of dollar or tax rate % increase are we looking at for the school? Like, so there's a 7.27% overall
Right.
budget impact.
Yep.
I assume that you didn't have you cannot yet tell us what % that will be on the change that would hit to the tax rate.
Right now, our projection is that it would be $1.70 on the tax rate.
Oh, did I miss
Yep.
that somewhere?
Yeah, it's $1.70.
Where is it?
Oh, I don't know. He said it.
Oh, you said it. Okay.
Yeah.
Did I write it? Okay, thank you.
It'd
Anyway,
be in the revenue sheet
Thank
that's
you.
on that way too many documents I sent you, but. sorry.
okay.
And Rob, that may increase depending on their further discussions
Oh,
next Tuesday.
What may increase?
The $1.70.
The revenue.
The revenue could always change between now and when this committee moves it forward, because it's still December and lots of things move around between now and February. So in other words, what we decide the 750 that we're putting towards it, that could alter, or its source could change.
I see.
But the consensus of the board was people were pretty comfortable with the numbers as I talked about them tonight. At our last
Is that the $1.70 though, the bottom line tax impact that residents would see, or are there still potential increases for different reserves?
So this is just the operating budget, not warrants.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Do we have an idea on what kind of warrants we're looking?
We're going to talk about that tomorrow or next Tuesday.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting. I asked the question when they were here last week. What affects the state tax rate? It's gone from $1.82 down to $1.22, a 60-cent decline, which obviously affects the final tax rate for the whole school, brings it down to $1.10 increase. And I didn't get any explanations to just why that happens. It still is a total baffle to me.
Yeah,
I mean, that's really helping out your situation
mhm,
this year.
it is. And when you look at the amount of money coming from the state up above on the revenue sheet, there's not a lot of variation. The education adequacy grant is actually up 96,000. Again, the SWEPT is down, but we know that's coming out of our own pockets as well. So we can talk about that. And then other state aid is only down 5,000. So we're getting more money and the rate is decreasing.
Did you understand, it was Catherine, right, that made this? Did you understand her answer to my question as to how those two relate? How's it set? And obviously this money never leaves the town.
Right.
It's part of what, in essence, the school gets.
So if we go back to our meeting in September, and I can bring that back, but it should be in the notes that formula for how they determine what we're going to get from the state is all in there per pupil.
Oh, no, I understand that whole, I understand that whole monkey drill. I've looked at that 100 times. But my basic question is the state determining X amount of dollars, and the dollars are this line here, the state education plus the SWEPT as a major contribution to the school, to our town. Now, are those two related to a total number that they're trying to get to Hopkinton?
So the number that comes to Hopkinton is dictated by that formula. I think what is happening here is not all of the state's responsibility for aid comes from SWEPT, of course.
Correct.
So it's coming from other revenue sources within the state. My guess is those revenue sources are greater, so they're able to reduce the SWEPT. But I don't have those numbers. We can certainly explore that. So more money from restaurant meals tax, those kinds of things.
Yeah, that drives the fact that this could be lowered at the state education. Why don't they give more money back? Why don't they just keep coming? Okay, it's still a real monkey show, that one.
It's hard to decipher.
Oh, I got.
But I think anytime you've got revenue coming from multiple sources, when you look at that pie chart that the state uses, it's, there's a significant different highways of revenue coming in, so.
Before I saw that chart, I thought the room and meals tax brought in a lot more money to it than it's really a small amount. But that's the one that's quoted a lot. Well, that's down because that's why we can't fund education so well.
Other thoughts on where we stand, particularly the budget, I think.
I just wanted to thank everybody and echo how much we all appreciate all your hard work. Neil, Ken, Mr. NATO, and all the department heads that fed these many pages that I read line by line. But I was wondering with regards to the valuation next year, if I'm not mistaken, the line item is like $82,000 or something that we're going to have to spend to actually go through that process. Is that something that we are contracting a third party to do? And so is that third party already under contract?
We put money into that every year, and this year is the final year, and it's just more.
Ah, I see. So how much does it cost to do a reevaluation every 5 years, or at least this time around? How much is it going to cost?
So I think it's a little over 100,000 total. And it used to be towns did it every 5 years, did the entire thing all at once. Now most towns, and we started doing this, I think 15 years ago, review a quarter of the property a year. So they look at physical changes basically, because the statistical numbers and the sales that you use are still based on 2019. And then in that fifth year, you do the statistical update based on the recent sales. So we contract for 5 years in this. So at this time next year, we'll probably have an RFQ out to relook at that. So
Does do building permits and does that play into the statistics as well?
Yes, so that is physical changes. So you are taxed on whatever is there on April 1st, which is the beginning of the tax year. I don't know why it's April 1st, but it is. So anyone with a building permit outstanding gets a visit from the assessor right around, obviously not all on April 1st because that's impossible, but right around April 1st, and their physical attributes that are on their property card are adjusted to match whatever is there. So technically, if on April 1st, you didn't have a house and on April 2nd you did, you would not be taxed on that house for that year. So,
And it wouldn't play into our valuation as an overall town.
right. But each year, the amount that we go up is really largely based on building and we've seen more of that in the last few years. For a long time, we had almost no new homes, but we've had quite a few, relatively speaking, in the last 3 years. So, and clearly sales are showing, I track sales just sort of to see, I think the average sale price is 609 for a home in Hopkinton that's using the last 100 sales. And they are assessed overall they're selling about 65% over assessment. So there's clearly going to be some major changes. So we'll be doing lots of education about assessing in 2024.
Everybody will be happy when the tax rate comes.
The tax, yes, but they get their valuations first and think it's the old tax rate with the new valuations.
In that phone line.
Don't put in a new faucet.
So actually a follow-up question on that. You're not waiting for the 5 years to get the benefit of like building additions. That comes in.
Right. So,
Where we have been assuming a 0.5% increase a year in the total valuation.
Okay.
but a new house that's built that may have come on in 2023
Right.
is being assessed using the statistics, the 2019 statistics.
I guess the crux of my question though then is like, what does it matter? Like, either you assess the house at like 300,000 and they have a 27% tax rate, or you assess it at 600,000 and they have a 15% tax rate. Like, it's still the same pie to the point. It only
does
only the delta of building matters,
right,
for the purpose of helping.
but in order to be fair and equitable, if you build a new house and it's assessed at 2023 values, and they live next door to you who's assessed at 2019 values, they're paying way more than their fair share. Does that make sense? And what the reval does is not so much, it isn't to lower your rate or anything. It's to get everyone to the fair market value, so it's fair and equitable across the board. Now, assessing is not a science, it's an art. So what you may pay a lot for, I wouldn't pay a dime for, and on the other hand, it may be the opposite.
Open your tax bill.
I'll be calling the phone line.
I always encourage anyone, when you get your new assessment, to make an appointment, sit down with the assessors and go through your property card line by line and make sure that it's accurate. There was one year I checked my property card and I all of a sudden had a shed that I didn't have. So check it, because it's mass appraisal. So things get done kind of mass. So you want to make sure your individual one is correct.
So I'm not hearing a ton of discussion of the town budget. in terms of the increase. I guess my question to everybody is, do we want to come back next week? Do we have some other information that we'd like to have on this? Or do we want to just sit with it until our January meeting?
I'm happy to wait until January.
So am I.
Anybody disagree with waiting till January on this? Anybody have anything they want to know next week?
I would say I wish I had things that I want to know. There's not a lot, well, that beyond that. Like, I personally feel like I'm like struggling to figure out where I could even press the town.
Yeah.
So
I think the only real opportunity is to defer some of the capital improvement investments and then so we understand the implications of that. And so I think if someone felt like that was an appropriate way to go in order to bring down that tax rate increase, then that's something to discuss.
Right.
I'm personally not going to suggest that, but that's where the opportunity, such as it is, exists.
Right, because we can't affect the bond and we can't affect the healthcare costs.
Yeah, the bond is chewing up 40% of the increase in the operating budget. And so it's really in the capital.
And I mean, I do think it's important to keep our eye on the ball on the healthcare cost, which is for the school and the town is a big deal. We're not going to fix that system on the town level, but it's frustrating.
And I think I'd say we have a standard request into Neil and Kelly to continually be looking at ways we can save on healthcare costs.
Right. Which I'm sure there are not a lot.
Unfortunately,
and I agree on the CIP. I feel like we spent so much time over the last 3 years talking about trying not to kick the can down the road till we have to get some big bond so we can have some predictability. It's important.
and the select board did defer some of the CIP costs that didn't, future years. And, particularly the roads.
Right.
Cut that from 400 to 100,000.
But there's risk there too, right? Because if the roads degrade to the point where you have to rebuild a road, then all of a sudden you've lost that significantly.
I mean, we're starting to catch up and I don't want us to fall back.
I guess I just throw this out as a thought, being on the CIP committee. Every year we go through the same thing. We keep pushing things out to get it sort of within some reason. And I just ask you to look at the 179 line, the total appropriations. If you kick it down to 25, and that's already up 800,000. And you kick it up down the next line, it's up to almost 3 million. If you kick it, you're not gaining anything unless you just take something totally out.
Right. Decide not to actually do it.
Right. And that means you don't do a fire truck or you don't do this. I mean,
The tanker truck was like a $500,000,
but
but we just had 2 fires.
Right. It degrades the service, and that comes back to the logic of defining what the service goal is. And you either bite the bullet or you cut services. But I just throw that out as a comment. We've been kicking for a lot of years. Not to say it's not a good idea, but it's not a new concept.
Yeah.
I'm not advocating for it.
No. No.
I think that's for the voters to decide.
Exactly.
You
You lay the facts out and let it be.
So unless I'm mishearing, what I'm hearing is our next meeting should be in January. When we get the full presentation, but I do want to just echo what Rob had said. Anybody who's available to go next Tuesday, it's probably a good opportunity if we hear the school budget twice. Once when it's being voted on and discussed, and then once with a presentation with us, it'll probably be helpful. I know I went to the last one and that was helpful. So, to the extent people are available, I would recommend it.
So January, what would be the
It's
next
the
meeting?
second Wednesday.
It's the 7th, right? 10th.
The 10th, it looks like. Is that
10th.
right, Neil?
Mhm.
Can I bring up a different point and
Mhm.
Sure.
just in general conversation, thought, philosophy? And I'm a little bit, I don't know. I've always often wondered because people will think that you're being defensive when you speak this way, but you know, I hear the words in the budget committee and over the last few years about it's too big, it's unsustainable, those kinds of terms. I hear about your neighbor and it concerns me greatly. But then I think about we really, at some point, either individually or as a committee, should operationally define what we mean by what's reasonable. So in my brain, I was curious what was reasonable. And the most reasonable way for me to look at what I pay in taxes is to look at my effective tax rate. So what is my income? What are my property taxes? And what percentage of my income am I paying towards property taxes in Hopkinton? So I did that. And over the last 12 years, the numbers are pretty reasonable. I'm happy to share if you want me to share. And I think when we think about where we live, it's really hard for people to base it on where other people live. But, you know, as gross income, generally speaking, going back 12 years, it was a little under 6% was my effective tax rate. And then I had the audacity to retire and it went up to about 7%. When I look at the net, so using taxable income over again was right around 7 and now is up at about 9. So that's my effective tax rate, which I think, given that I don't pay income tax, we don't pay sales tax, et cetera, is a pretty reasonable share of my income to live where I live in the manner in which we live. And then I thought about, well, there are some other Hopkintons in the world. So what is it going to cost me to live there? And where would my taxes be? So there's Hopkinton, Iowa, population 622. If you're interested, it looks like a lovely town. And it would cost me $4,000 more to live there. In Hopkinton, Rhode Island, population 8,411, it would cost me about $2,500 more per year to live there. Hopkinton, Mass, I don't want to live there, 18,000 people, way too big, but again, about $4,000 more per year. So, and those calculations, there's, you know, they look at what your income tax would be because you'd be paying state income tax, sales tax, fuel taxes, and then you take the property tax. So for me to get the real numbers, I got their property tax, used my valuation to see what my actual property taxes would be. And Hopkinton, New York, was a little more than $4,000. So we're the cheapest Hopkinton in America, at least for me, my current property valuation. So I think the narrative around taxes, not only in Hopkinton, but in the state of New Hampshire, we really need to think about our effective tax rates as we're going through, you know, how the state is going to contribute. Are we going to end up in a system where, again, kind of like my question to the Kentucky precinct, you decrease the taxes, but you increase the rate, is it just going to be a trade-off? So, you know, I would ask members of the committee to just sort of explore that and see where your effective tax rates are. When I was doing during COVID, my gazebo talks, where I get really concerned is when somebody comes and says, my effective tax rate is, you know, 20%, and it's an elderly person. That gets really hard. But I think we need to substantiate, again, operationally define what we mean by what our fair tax is. And just talking about big numbers doesn't really work because it doesn't put it in a construct that we can say, this is reasonable. For me right now, this is reasonable. Will I say that in 10 years, 15 years? I don't know. You know, I also understand that as you retire and things stay flat, prices are going to go up. That number is going to get bigger. I get that, you know. So anyway, that's kind of how I'm thinking about taxes right now and how it relates to this committee and budgets in general. But just trying to get people to think more rationally about where we're at and less emotionally. And I think if you do some of that math, it becomes more rational. And it can become emotional if you're we live in this state that loves the fact that we have no broad-based taxes except property, but it is brutally regressive and unfair. So anyway, those are, my thoughts on what I've been thinking about, and I thought it was important to share with the committee. So,
Really helpful.
Yeah.
So we can't ask everyone to do the math, right? 5,600 people.
Yes, thank you.
So
Such a nerd.
I would love to have a Hopkinton tax project with an online calculator that you could go in and anonymously, because no one likes to say, this is what I make. Everybody gets all, I don't know, gummed up about that. As a public employee, I'm like, okay, I make $72,000. Everybody knows, right? Whatever. But it would be great to do that, to see where the norm is and where the outliers are. And then, perhaps at the town level, there could be more, what do we call it, allowances for people where their effective tax rates are, sky high. That's something you could do, but you can't do that until you have that conversation and have real data. I mean, I'm sure that there are people in this town who pay a lot of property taxes that have a lower effective tax rate than I do. I don't know about a lot of people. There are some people. So, sorry, I interrupted.
And that
No, it's okay.
NHS site gives, median household income for the town. It gives some average numbers, which obviously they're outliers, but it does.
That would,
The first year I was on the committee, though, I remember asking about some of the statistics on the percentage of the town that take advantage of our, I don't know if it's a rebate. It's not a rebate. It's like an exception. What do we formally call it?
Low income.
Tax assistance.
Elderly exemption. And it is just for elderly. It's not for low income working age families.
But we can only offer. We can only offer what the state allows us to offer, and that is there's disability exemptions, there's elderly exemptions, there's veterans exemptions. So you will probably see on the warrant this year increases to those exemptions, because with the assessed values changing, somebody who may be receiving, in order for them to stay level with the same exemption they're receiving now, the amount has to go up. So you probably will see that on the warrant.
And are those exemptions, are they like a scaling?
Generally, they're a set amount off the assessed value, and they progressively go up based on age, starting at 65. Although the town meeting has options to have just one or to do it higher. So
I guess to get more to the point, if somebody has like a $10,000 tax bill, are most of the exemptions giving them like a $1,000 exemption, or is it like a $9,000 exemption?
I think what you see often, well, if somebody meets the income and asset criteria, which are relatively low, for example, I think our exemption is set at, for example, if you had a mobile home in the meadows and met that criteria, you're probably not paying any tax, because the value, the exemption is about the same as the value. But that was when we did the reval, and mobile homes in the meadows were selling for 80,000, and now they're selling for 250,000. So in order to get the same exemption, that amount has to go up substantially, which doesn't reallocate anything. It just keeps them where they're at. And this gets more complicated by the second, doesn't it?
So Rich, if your neighbor is a senior, make sure that if they're low income, that they're talking
No,
to
she's
Neil.
not a senior, just a single income person with a high mortgage and car payments. And one thing that I like to be mindful of is that when I think of these budgets is what's it look like 10 years down the road with these budgets? If my memory serves me correctly, compound interests budgets that increase 7% a year. You're looking at your taxes doubling every 10 years or so. And so, we're looking at, closing in on what, 13% budget on the town and 7% on the schools. So, we're maybe doubling our budget, doubling our tax burden on the citizens less than every 10 years. It's doubling. So, when I think of my neighbor like that, can she get raises to keep up with a doubling in her home taxes every 10 years? No. And the other thing I think that we need to maybe just consider is, the housing committee was talking about affordable housing here in Hopkinton. And of course, we don't have much affordable housing, but we've already had a diaspora of people who couldn't afford to live here that have already left. Hopkinton's tax rates have chased away people, and those houses have been sold and new people have moved in, and those people can afford to stay here. And the housing committee was talking about Hopkinton becoming a homogeneous community, and maybe we need to do some housing projects to re-diversify our community. But high spending and adding services hurts people who are on the fringes, especially. But those people who are hurt leave, and so we don't see the pain of those people that left.
I think that's a fair, an absolutely fair consideration, Rich, but on the flip side of that, like, you also do want to attract people to live in the town, and people are choosing to move to Hopkinton at a town where a lot of similarly sized New Hampshire towns are shrinking in population, just generally.
Mhm.
So there's it's not a zero sum. Fabulous.
Sorry.
No, I was done.
I also think that the CIPs are big drivers for the town and the school. And I'm mindful of everything that you're saying and agree with the emotional impact and the financial impact on individual people. And it's valid and something that we should always be mindful of. But I also worry about, it could do more than double if we defer enough maintenance, if we defer the roads, we defer the school buildings and all those things, then we're looking at bonds that are huge, like we were looking into when I first came onto this committee.
Yeah.
And that's also like, if we don't plan and we don't try to responsibly, plan 5, 10, 15 years down the road for that stuff, then we're going to be in a bad position. So, I mean, that doesn't answer the question to the individual that can't pay their bills and moves out of town because they can't afford to live here. That doesn't answer that question, but I think it's another consideration.
I felt like pretty much every year on this committee that I have voted for budgets that I knew were going to force people to move out of town. And it's a real tension, right? It's a paradox, which is to pass what we might feel, any one of us might feel is a responsible and appropriate budget to support our school and our town at a level of service that people in this town have consistently, through their voting, have said what they want. That is going to result in people who can't afford to live here. I think it's for me, it's been the hardest thing actually about being on the budget committee is casting votes in favor that I know we're going to have that impact on vulnerable people in our town. And I still feel like the budgets that we have passed have been appropriate and responsible. It's a tough one. And when I think about the increases, this is part of when I was looking at this data on the town, but I know it's true on the school too. We have had a few years of pretty high percentage increases in our budgets and tax rates. And, they're partly due to inflation, and they're partly due to the town making choices to invest in these capital needs that we had put off for a long time, both at the town level and the school level, the town on roads and the school on essentially all the school facilities. So we're bearing the brunt, I think, of that right now. And I mean, to your point, we can not do that, but at some point you have to pay the piper, or you have a decrease in the quality of your services that you're providing to the town. That's the choice.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking with, Mr. NATO's thought experiment. I did my math. I'm at 10. Investments or whatever, but let's say that the tax calculator that he envisions came to fruition and we got enough people to get a good sample size and everyone was at 10.3% on average. What do we do at that point? Right? Do we decrease the number of police? Do we stop supporting George's Park? I mean, I have no idea where we go from there.
I mean, for me, when I think about effective tax rates, I think about it's the narrative of what it costs to live where we share goods. That's it. And this is 10 cents on the dollar is what it costs me to live in a place that takes care of the roads and takes care of their kids and takes and offers all of the other, public goods that we've got in this town. And that's just the reality of how we live in a democratic republic. So for me, that's normal. I don't find that out of whack, and Rich, I'm thinking about where is this going? More geek math here.
Please.
So the last 20 years, my taxes year over year, 4.6% would be the change for me. If I look at just the last 10 years, so 2014 to the present, 3.46% year over year change. If I look at just 2019 to 23, 3.98% increase. And if I go back the first 10 years I lived in town, it was 2.9%. So it's somewhere in that range between 3 and 4.5% as it's, the moving average. But then again, those are the nominal numbers, but then it doesn't take into account what my income is. So I really would hope that folks in town can just take a breath, have that conversation with themselves about what are the realistic costs of living in the place in which you live as a percentage of your income, instead of thinking about it as, I opened my tax bill and it broke 10,000 for the first time. Yeah, I was like, whoa, okay. That's but then I do the math and I say, you know what, that's what it is, and that's a reasonable amount of money to pay for where I live and what I get for those dollars.
I think the problem, just to emphasize what you said earlier, is how regressive it is, and that is not unique to Hopkinton. And so I can speak that my tax burden does not feel at all unfair personally based on my income, but I would certainly be paying in other states. But someone like Rich's neighbor, there are not many levers that we can pull to. I would happily pay an income tax. I guess I shouldn't say that on a recorded line. But
Run for governor.
too late. Yeah.
I would also happily pay an income tax.
But this is also,
You're screwed too now, Vicky.
but this is
I've been
also part
screwed
of
for
the
years.
problem. Every year I go back and I talk to my wife about the budget committee, and I feel like these big issues, wage inequality, the lack of a sales tax or income tax in this state, these can't be solved with the town budget. And that's the problem we find ourselves in every year, is we're sitting here and trying to grapple with the effects of these much larger issues that have to be dealt with at the state and national level at the ballot box. And we can't do that from here. So we do our best to be mindful and consider it in the budgets that we pass, and it's going to hurt people every time. We could pass a flat budget and it would hurt people. Because the cost of living is outpacing wages, and that's the reality of the world. which isn't to say that that's a blithe answer to the person, your neighbor. But we can't solve that problem. I would love
Good
to.
to say about it. She's always good with those perspectives. Miss you being here.
Got a little delay there.
Debbie's ready to make the motion to adjourn.
Yeah, so
She can just close.
does anyone have more to say, or should we entertain a motion to adjourn until 2024?
So moved.
Second.
We have to do a voice, well, any discussion? I'm assuming no, we have to do a voice vote.
Hey, yeah, time for a beer.
Yes, for me.
Yes.
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 Aye.
Yes.
Debbie?
Came out of that state representative.
Thumbs up.
Neil, Debbie voted yes.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.